Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, I'd now like to call the April 16th, 2025 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Would we please start with the roll call?
Yes. Michelle Roth is out today. Mary Lynn is not here quite yet. And Corkett on run.
Here.
Robert Davidson.
Hello.
Ralph Groswald.
Here.
Daniel Leonard.
Here.
Ethan Augrey.
Here.
Lisa Knobloch. Here. Becky Doyle. Here. Susan Bartlett. Here. Zach Blazek.
Here.
Grant Penland.
Here.
And Heather McIntyre is here. Councilmember Hopkins is with us remotely. And Chair, we have a quorum.
Perfect. We'll start by reading the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the first peoples have with this land. It's our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. Our inclusion statement. The Sustainability Advisory Board embraces diverse perspectives from its members and the public to create an inclusive space where everyone feels welcome to share their opinion. The board asks that all attendees listen and speak with respect and avoid attacks on individuals or specific identities. First item after that is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any revisions that they need to recommend or changes, corrections? Hearing none, is there a motion to
Motion to approve the minutes.
second? All right, everybody in favor? Nice and easy. Are there any things not on the agenda that we need to add?
No, but I was going to offer up, I didn't talk to you about this earlier, Zach, but do you want to swap places on general business so you can go first and then you go?
Sure.
All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Zach Blazak then to go to landscaping code updates.
Yep, that's the next thing. So take it
What
over.
would you like me to be, Lisa?
Do you want to swap with me?
Sure.
So that's probably the easiest here. Step out of your way.
Have a random slideshow.
I'll give you the
That's great.
notes. You're ready to go.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Zach. For those of you I haven't met, I'm the sustainability planner. I've been in that position for 3.5 or 4 years, something like that now. And I've presented to this board once or twice, but I feel like there's new faces this time, and I've never done it in person. So great to meet you all. This is kind of a similar / abridged presentation from the one I gave at council in February, where they gave us direction to do some stuff. So that's specific to our landscape code. I'm here to share those updates today and the work we've been doing and the work we anticipate doing with council here coming up in the near spring, summer future. And I think that's the right button. Okay, so in the last year, the state passed a law which requires all municipalities to prohibit landscape practices for water conservation, including the addition of new non-functional turf in commercial spaces, right-of-ways, places like that that are generally not residential. So we came to council in February to chat about some of the things that we could do and some things we have to do in our code to become compliant with that state law. So we've been taking a look at functional and non-functional turf in Longmont and kind of some areas where we again can implement those changes and specific to our code. So again, just a brief overview of the law itself. A local entity shall, a local entity shall not install, plant, replace, or allow any person to install, plant, replace any non-functional turf, artificial turf, or invasive plant species as part of a new development. So all of the work that we're doing is specifically focused on new developments. It's not focused on projects that currently exist, you know, stuff that's already been built, although we do have processes that I'll chat on just at the very end for places that do have existing non-functional turf that want to come in and make changes. But again, that's what the law says. Right now, our code is not compliant with the law. So by the end of the year, we have to make changes.
Zach, sorry to interrupt. Just because it's important in context, could you define what non-functional turf is?
I would be happy to. So, I will go to my next slide. So I'll start with functional turf. Functional turf is basically grass that we use, right? So think about it's our football field park, it's our grass at the park that we use. It also includes all this language about golf courses, but which is ridiculous, but whatever. My example that I use in the presentation, this is Dawson Park over by Mac, right? This is like grass that we use to spread out our blankets, like cash to do stuff on, right? In the alternative, non-functional turf is turf that we don't use for recreational purposes or any of the other civic community purposes listed. So like this is a great example. This is up on 17th and Harvard, same exact neighborhood. And it's just a strip of grass between the street and the sidewalk that isn't grass that like, we're not going out there to play catch, right? We're not spreading the blanket out having a picnic. And you would be amazed if you drive around town just exactly how much of this exists, right? And a lot of why it exists we'll get into, but this is everywhere, right? And so the purpose of the law and the purpose of the changes we're implementing are to make sure we're not installing grass like this in the future. Why? Because it's wasteful, water use. It doesn't actually contribute anything sort of beneficial as far as pollinators, all kinds of reasons. Here's another example from Costco. This is one of my favorite examples of a piece of grass that shouldn't exist, but does. You know, again, nobody's using that, right? It's just there to A, landscape code requirements, and B, just to be green, right? And there's lots of things that we can do that are green and that are live and that are thriving that are not necessarily grass.
Sorry, when you say, you just said it's there to meet the landscaping requirements.
Yeah.
There are requirements that.
We're getting there. Yeah.
Cool. Just checking.
Hang with me. We're almost there.
Sorry, I'm really excited. Thank you for being
This is one more example, and I kept this one in my presentation just because it shows an example of sprinklers being used, and you can see how much of that water is clearly going in the road and on the sidewalk and not, you know, being used to actually water the plants itself. I'll quickly mention that last year we had a policy assessment done for our code itself. That assessment gave us a total of 16 recommendations to consider. Some of those we can implement at a staff level and we're working on it, but 2 of them we took to council again in February. Those were to develop consistent xeriscape principles and standards and to adopt a non-essential turf policy to go along with that state law. At that meeting, council directed us to pursue the following code modifications. That was to amend 1505.040 to demonstrate compliance with the state law, do the non-essential turf changes. We also are going to come back and provide language for council to consider with residential uses. Might or might not implement those. We'll see kind of what the appetite of the council is, but it's an option. We're also going to change language in the code to strengthen our current ground cover requirements. Kind of like you were getting at, and I'll get into this in detail, but right now our current ground cover requirements almost often say you have to have turf grass as the primary ground cover, which is sort of counterintuitive to this change that we would make saying you're not allowed to install grass. Simple, but we have to make like 11 changes in the code to be fully compliant. So I will go on from there. This is just an example of that language specifically. Irrigated low water consuming grass or other vegetation or material shall be the primary ground cover in areas where hardscape is not proposed. So again, this sentence is in our code 708 landscape code as it's currently ready. So we're going to go in and modify that language to A, remove all of the language requiring turf grass as the primary ground cover, and B, expand the language to include, allow, encourage other varieties of ground cover that are actually suited for our climate, that encourage xeric principles, and again, reduce the use of non-functional turf, especially as in these situations where it's required by our code. Just going to get rid of that and have other options. Again, we're going to come back with language that specifically adopts a non-essential turf policy. So it will say, you know, new non-functional turf on all of these areas: commercial, institutional, industrial, common interest, street rights of way, parking lots, medians, transportation corridors. New grass there is prohibited in those areas. That is not considered functional turf. And that's gonna be kind of the big final piece of language that we're adding to our code changes specific to our turf policy. And then the last thing that I want to mention, just to wrap up my presentations, is that we are in the process of developing xeric landscape designs that are city approved. So we have our residential landscape conversion templates done, approved, ready to share. So if you're ever talking to people out in the community who are interested in converting their front yards from grass to anything else, we have city approved templates that, you know, if folks are running into, well, my HOA says this, or, you know, I'm not sure what my neighborhood will think. This is a city approved template. You can take it, go to the, you know, flower shop and go to the hardware store and get all the stuff you need and just do it. We are in the process right now of finishing similar commercial landscape templates for those places like Costco, for example, who have areas that are just grass and sitting there doing nothing, and they want to make a conversion themselves. So again, if you encounter a business in the community that you might be interested, send them my way. We have templates for them, and hopefully, you know, having these will make it easier for places to get people to consider doing conversions. Yeah.
This is great information. Is there a program of outreach to HOAs, that sort of thing, to let people know what, because all through this I was thinking, okay, I understand getting rid of it. What are we going to put in its place?
You're looking at him. He's going to go to the NTLA tomorrow. Basically, it's been word of mouth. We're working on making changes to our website. That has been a challenging process all in itself, but basically it's by me sharing this information with as many people as I can.
I think it's really important to get it out there in an active way as opposed to a passive way. People may stumble on the website.
Yeah.
They're looking, but I mean, once you start letting people know how this can change our community and what alternatives there are, there may be some real action taken.
And I'll share with you this sort of program of folks coming in and doing conversions on their yards. It's happened very organically, and we've had a ton of success with it in the last year. It's basically been the last year and a half that I've been, it kind of started with the language from HOAs was, you know, HOAs can no longer say no to people who want to come in and do conversions on their lawn, right? So we suddenly got all of these people just reaching out and saying, hey, I want to do a turf conversion on my property. What's the process? How do we do it? So we had to come up with a process and figure it out, and figure out how to make sure people were meeting our standards for live plant material, you know, rather than just kind of putting rocks all over their yard or, you know, hardscaping in a way that doesn't meet the code.
Lisa, what is the name of the two organizations, one of which I am a representative for, that are working with GLAs? I met with them yesterday. It's
Oh, the Sustainable Neighborhood Solutions.
SNS, I think never was SNS or SIS. Yeah, so there's two that are working with NGLA to make this happen. There's, I think at this point, half a dozen neighborhoods in the pipeline to work on this. I wanted to mention that, are you aware of the work of the Savory Institute, and are you in contact with them at all? So they're one of the primary organizations, along with the AMP folks, who are looking at how soil is changed back to the way that it always was, which is very deep organic matter and very wet, and how we have several hundred years worth of inexplicably grasses and other perennials, forbs, and so forth, and annuals in the soil that once grazed them intensively, they go back to the shortgrass prairie, which is what we're longgrass here. We're shortgrass prairie that we are here. And if that model is used, and there's a program that I'm just calling it Ungulates Everywhere, where there's intensive grazing done in city areas, then it can actually be returned to an area that doesn't need to be called xeric because it's not wet anymore. I'd be happy to send you information about this.
Sure.
There are cities who are starting to do this. It does, the problem with xeric landscape, I hate that word now, sorry, is that it's xeric because we're hot, because we have so much concrete, and because the soil is degraded and we're dry. So what we actually have is accommodation to a desertified landscape. But when you do the restoration of the soil using the intensive grazing, and it can be any ungulate, any or women, you can use horses or ponies if you want to, or zebras. No, you can't. Once it's restored, then you just need a periodic grazing, and the soil magically brings back the grasses and other plants that were there before the buffalo herds were destroyed. And we got into the situation of 75% of, well, every continent, that the great herds were destroyed. It goes back to the actually, and they didn't even know that all of those seeds were still in the soil. So I think it's something to consider, considering the fact that we are the terminus of the Great Plains here. And we could, once this happens, all plant matter except for one of the conifers gives off a syringe bacteria that lives which is part of its microbiome, that actually acts as an ice and water nucleator, and it brings rain. And they've been proving, Ralph is familiar with this because there was a little presentation about this. Even in cropland areas, when the syringe is given off, it is such a profoundly powerful nucleator of rain and water that you can have changes in the precipitation and the temperature that, of 10 degrees, 20 degrees in not a microclimate, but a local climate.
You can actually make a change of the weather within a few square mile area. And that presentation, are you familiar with?
And I'll send you a white paper about this. I'll send everyone here a white paper. I'll send it to
I was
you.
gonna ask if we could take one step back. At the very
Yeah.
beginning, you mentioned some other cities were at least looking into it, or.
So the Savory Institute, I met with the executive director last week. They have, I think, 70 or 80 projects around the world, and they have so many millions of acres in management in their holistic grazing, they don't even know how many they have. And because 75% of their Earth's landmass is desertified, and that's now been identified by many researchers as the crisis that if we could turn that around, we would change the temperature dramatically on the Earth. They're focusing on the large herds. However, other cities are working with a process that's regenerative, intensive grazing, mob grazing, and AMP are the other terms, and I can send you a set of white paper. And they're using like rent-a-goat herds, and there's a specific science to knowing how frequently the mob has to come through, how dense it needs to be, how long they have to be there. And for example, in places in Africa where no biologist could discernibly see any grass, they can bring in the mobs and they eat every last scrap. And when they move on, that land is regenerated. And they're like, we don't know how those cows are eating. We couldn't even see there was grass there. But and then the ancient seeds come back and the soil regenerates. Obviously, you can't have this happening on every mowing strip.
Yeah.
I turn every mowing strip into a mowing strip. But anyway, so this is my idea of utopia. So send everyone
Let
the.
me interject here, guys. I see Councilmember Popkin has his hand raised. And before he goes, we'll let him go, and then we can let Zach finish his presentation and try to stay on schedule. Go ahead.
It was hard for me to hear one thing, and just a clarification for board member Lynn. What was the name of the institute you mentioned? Sorry, you can finish your
The
drink.
Savory Institute is working with a large herd holistic management project, but you can also learn more about this from the Roots So Deep people. I can't remember the name of their organization, but they.
All right, did you say the Savory Institute? Like food is savory?
And their international headquarters are here in Boulder.
Oh, thank you
But
for
they
clarifying that. I appreciate
There's
it.
so many hundreds of millions in management, they don't even know how much, and it's growing all the time.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
And then the other thing I wanted to just build on here, because I think board member Lynn also raised a good point on like the term xeric, and I will just state my bias here is I don't particularly like that term either, and would encourage, just mostly from a plain language standpoint, not from an accuracy standpoint, but I don't think it helps from our communication of getting the word out of like, what are we actually talking about here? And so I would encourage this board and staff to think about both, not just like kind of the requirements here, but also what is the implication of the requirements and how is it communicated out to the community when we're actually doing that. I don't have a specific proposal on what the name change should be this moment. And we could even, we can even say xeric in the technical terms at some point, but I don't think the majority of people, and I might say the vast majority of people, know what xeric actually means. And certainly when I tell people about how I xeriscaped my front yard, I'm not using that term.
They think it's xeriscaping. I lived in
They
Arizona.
do, which is a different term as well. Yeah.
That's
So
the
if we can
wrong
just
way to
revisit
think
what this is called in the spirit of clarity of communication, I would highly encourage us to do that once we get to that point.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that xeric is not the end all be all, right? It's not the only solution to making sure that we are meeting our live plant material standards, which right now is written 75% of all areas of landscaping have that live plant material coverage. So xeric is great if you're, using it the right way, if your design is quality, you understand what it is that you're doing. But there are also alternatives to providing live ground cover that do not require you to use grass. So my approach to this process has been, how can we find ways to improve our code and to improve our plant material list and improve the way that we're doing our designs while not putting people in that corner. Xeric is a great option, but it's not the only option. So when we make these changes, the goal is to have that purpose be reflected.
Have you had any interaction with, the city of Boulder has a nature-based climate solutions department, and they're looking at all these same issues, and they put a lot of time, they have an actual department that's focusing on this. I just wonder, I don't have the gentleman's name in front of me. I could certainly send it to you, but might be an interesting.
Brett.
You remember his name?
What's his last name, Lisa?
Brett Kincaid.
Yes, that's
Brett
exactly
Kincaid.
right. Could be a tremendous resource, and one of the things that in the Front Range Sustainability Council, which is board members like this through the communities on the Front Range, is trying to find ways to collaborate and take advantage of best practices and resources up and down. And Boulder certainly has been a leader in this based on the presentation that we saw. Might be worth connecting, you may have something valuable for them, they may have something valuable for us.
I will share that I have cherry picked a couple of ideas. Not all
They're
of
not all
them,
yours?
but it's the best ideas come from people who already have, right? So
I was curious if you had, as far as communicating this with folks, if you've looked into maybe going directly to landscapers in the area, working directly with them. Because I know, just with our own HOA, the landscaper we work with, it's been like pulling teeth for them to do this kind of design work because they don't know how to do it. They're not into it. They have agreements with providers of turf that keep their costs down and that sort of thing. And it was kind of just so I wondered if there's maybe a short circuit going straight to landscaping companies and presenting them with these resources so that they can then turn when they serve HOAs and that sort of thing, be advocates.
yes, and that's a great question. The consultant that we are using to come up with these templates is doing a very similar thing to what you just said by making those connections themselves. And so we are, we're putting the city logo on this stuff and kind of having it be the neutral city approved example. Yeah. But those connections are being made. It's just being done kind of at the market level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I think that's the big thing is that the landscapers are the service providers, and they're the ones who can use this info. When we say xeric, they're the ones who should know what that means.
Yeah.
While we advertise to HOAs, what we're talking about is water saving. Right. What we're talking about is water-wise gardening or whatever it is.
And again, from my perspective, right, there is a market growing for that type of activity, right? I mean, I looked back at my data and I helped like over 100 people in the year 2024 do landscape conversions, right? And so there's momentum. Again, it's kind of slow, it's kind of word of mouth, but it's coming.
Okay, I have 3 questions related. Residential lots, private lots. Are there any mandates in the state law or in your draft about deadlines?
Great question. The state had a separate law that's still under consideration right now in the House for exactly that, for residential. And residential prohibitions or limits in some capacity on functional turf. I do not believe that law has enough momentum to pass as of right now. They kind of talked about it, they've made revisions, and it kind of seems to me, everything I had heard, that it was stuck in the mud for now. So whether we take that approach for new residential, again, that's probably going to be up to council before anything comes down from the state, at least right now. And then if something does in the future come down from the state, if we don't implement something now, we can react to it later.
Second and third questions are kind of related as well. Some lots, especially in the historic neighborhood, even though it looks like private, the right of way is so large that almost in some cases half of the land belongs to the right of way, half to the. And I know my case, for instance, we looked at all the watering systems from Halting all the way to the sidewalk, even though it's on the city's land. So, what kind of advice do you have for those in the code? That is to say, is the city going to go there and then remove? And then, how is that going to be managed?
Sure.
And then one more question: how about the food growing in the front yards? I mean, is there any advice, guidance, or organizational initiatives that is, Denver did that and it was really successful, it's still very successful.
Yeah, two great questions. So for your first question, the way it's written now, right, and this applies not just to landscaping, but also like, for example, snow removal, right? So, and I live over in this neighborhood, so just speaking from firsthand, right? If I don't shovel my sidewalk, then code enforcement will come by and give me a ticket for not, or give me a warning for not shoveling my sidewalk, right? So I maintain that whole area up to the street, and I can landscape it how I want, and I can, make it look how I want. If I wanted to do planter boxes and grow food there, I can certainly do that. There's nothing in the code right now that prevents you from doing that. And an allowed accessory use in the code is urban level agriculture. So like for me, I have 6 big planter boxes on my property in my front yard that I use to grow food.
If I did understand rightly, the state mandates the city to change that. That is to say, if there's turf there, the law says don't do it.
So that only applies to new developments. That does not apply to existing stuff. So that's again why we have this program for folks who are interested, because I mean, a lot of what it takes to maintain these big lots over in neighborhoods like this, it's a ton of sweat equity and it's a ton of work. For me, I didn't want to do that much work. I wanted to grow food instead. So, you know what I mean?
So did you have more slides in this? I feel
This
like
is my very last slide.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'm in the question section and I'm happy to take questions as long as you'd like. I'm also happy to wrap up whenever you guys are ready.
No, I think this is discussion.
So when I first was working, when I was at Prescott College and I was on the team that was trying to figure out what to do with the xeriscaping, we never had a chart that looked like this. So thank you. That looks like that's going to actually create a connected canopy possibly, or most of that, and then in the future that would just be a green block, which would be nice to see.
Well, and I'll also share too, this is one of 4 residential charts that we have.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have for the people who want to just do a portion, or people who are like me and don't have like 10 grand to spend on redoing your entire front lawn, right? You can do it bit by bit, you can do it pieces at a time. So we have a variety of these templates for everyone's flavor of how they want to do their front yard landscaping.
And the other thing I want to say is that over on the historic east side, there's tons of people who are trying to grow food. And I live on a 1/4 acre permaculture lot. We've got like 30 trees and 100 fruit berry bushes. We've discovered that it's very difficult to grow any but the most random perennial vegetables.
It's been an experiment for me.
Well, and now we have the little farm down in Lafayette, and what all of the farmers do is they put up polytunnels, high and low tunnels, and you don't want to see that in the front yard. So I'm wondering if you might, and you can make, I'm sure the neighbors think our yard's a disaster, but you can make a charming woodland kind of feel if you go with fruit primarily, to do with the trees and the bushes. And we don't water very much. I think we watered 3 times last year. So
I have
just-
grapes that do really well. Personally.
Our grapes got eaten by the Japanese beetles, that's a different story, but, and again, they don't need very much water either.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that the vegetables, I mean, I see a lot of people in our neighborhood who put up the raised beds. They don't grow, and they either take them out or they put a plastic tunnel over them, and so that's not something neighbors wanna see, fortunately.
So is that because pests? What's the driving issue?
Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it keeps in the moisture, it deals with the pests, the pests and the pets. I didn't mean to say that actually.
Yeah, squirrels are a problem.
Check
But
the
hail
squirrels.
is the other one.
Hail is very, very bad. You should see all the conversations on next door about cats, your neighbor's cats and my tomato bed. It's just, anyway. But you can do really well, all kinds of things using the polytunnels.
And again, it is totally allowed to have food production as your, live plant material in your front yard, in your side yard, in your backyard. You want to be part of CSA and a portion of your property be dedicated to the actual use of growing food. That's an allowed use in the code. It's not something. So.
When you say new development, are you talking about like wholly new infrastructure or someone for re-landscaping a median? Is that new development?
So, great question. A lot of, and this is a separate effort in the WaterWise group here at the city, but a lot of those areas right now that currently have functional turf, we have a map of all of those areas, and we're targeting one little project at a time with the funding that we have. This year, there's a project over at Clark Centennial Park. Last year, I'll show you, we did a conversion at Kensington Park. So there's little areas where over a long period of time, you'll start to see those types of conversions made. That area along 17th and Harvard is another area that we're targeting this year to re-landscape. So bit by bit, you'll see those changes. Again, it's based on staff capability, funding, cost money.
But if Costco wanted to go and redo that patch of grass, could they lay down whole new turf? Is that?
So yes, technically they could, if they were replacing what is existing. They could not replace, like, I'll go back to Costco. So there's like this area over here that doesn't have turf. They can't go in and add new turf to what's already there. And if they wanted to come in and re-landscape this area, then they could do that through their process.
And do we have control over that mark? I mean, because I'm wondering, like, that is that every year they must go in and just reseed it. What I wonder if is there any capability of city council to say, if you're going to do a substantial reseeding or a substantial resodding, that's new development, and you need to transition it to something water-wise.
Yeah, so the state law as it's currently written, again, does not account for those types of changes. It would be up to the council to go above and beyond.
So council could do that.
They could. Yeah. Our recommendations are that's probably too far.
Yeah.
Just because then now you're getting into what's the business doing? How do you enforce it? Is another challenge with that. I might notice if I go to Costco and pick is that they change their landscaping, but the ability for the city staff to actually go out and be enforcement of those businesses is it's complicated, right?
Yeah, I would just add two other comments there because it's an interesting conversation. The first, if we were to be considering a policy change on that front, I'd want to make sure that, and I think council would generally want to make sure that we're treating private property owners consistently when we're doing that. And maybe you could distinguish between residential and commercial, but I just wanted to let the group think about that. Honestly, more importantly, probably this is an educational and maybe at most an incentive based, but chances are if they were to look at the time and cost management of this, if they are reseeding, if they are watering, look at the cost proposition. And I have a feeling that through some conversations there, they might just say, oh, thanks for telling us about these practices. We might just make some of these changes on our own. And I'd say it's probably the approach that's worth trying first. Or I'd welcome staff to chime in if you have already. But like that would be probably my suggested approach before we went to a policy change there. Just to see like what would it actually take to do that? Because then the moment we pass that policy, to Zach's point, there becomes that enforcement question, and capacity to enforce and how we are administering that process fairly and consistently.
Yeah, and kind of as Councilor Hopkins mentioned that, right? I have quite a lot of work on my desk of, not Costco specifically, but there are commercial places that are coming in. There's residents as well all the time saying, hey, how do I change this? I need to save money on water, right? Our water bill is crazy. Spending on the maintenance and the mowing and all that stuff is really expensive for folks. And so, the momentum, like I was talking about, is there, I think, for people to realize, oh, I can save money if I don't have to mow this once a week. Yeah. And if I'm not watering every single day. So, all good thoughts. Any other thoughts or questions for me?
Well, this is great progress.
That's cool. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you all.
Thanks for coming. Well, up next on the agenda, Lisa, you're on deck with the fueling station code options.
Exactly. So I have a presentation I'll walk through with you all. Feel free to jump in and ask clarifying questions as we go. We have Grant Penland here with us tonight. Grant, you want to wave hello?
Sure.
He's our planning director. He is the one that pulled together most of these examples that I'm going to walk through with you all. And if you all have technical questions, I'm going to point to him because I won't be able to answer those code-specific questions. So. You always have to hit it twice and Zoom. Yeah. All right. Councilmember Popkin, can you see that okay? Yep, all right. I'm gonna switch it to presentation. Okay, here we go. Okay, so just a reminder where this came from. On the March 4th council meeting, Councilmember McCoy made a motion to have the Sustainability Advisory Board make a recommendation to council, potentially planning and zoning, as we talked about last time, regarding a position on the continued development and appropriateness of future gas stations within the city. This is the timeline that we talked to you all about last month. So last month I brought to you this proposal. Today we're going to be, I guess I shouldn't have put a check there because we haven't finished that, but today we're going to be going through some code options and having a discussion of those options or other ideas that you all want to bring forward. I will take those between now and the next month and do some internal engagement to understand, are those things viable? Are there unintended consequences? Do we need to think through and that kind of stuff? Hopefully Grant can also chime in tonight if you will bring things forward that if he sees that those are things that we can move forward or things that might have those unintended consequences. And then I'll bring that back to you all in May, in which case we will work on drafting a statement, and hopefully between May and June we can have somebody that can volunteer, a couple of folks that can volunteer to finalize the statement and bring it back to this group in June. And then we'll do a special report to council. And then, as I mentioned last time, the P&Z Planning and Zoning Commission, kind of depending on that council decision. So this is small. I am not going to read through all of this. So hopefully you all can see this. Do you want me to make it a little bit bigger? I don't know. Can you make those disappear or no? Okay. So this is just, you all saw this last time, but just as a reminder, this is the existing code language that we have with regards to fueling stations. So first, I just wanted to call out that the current definition of a fueling station includes vehicle fuel and charging station. So that's just a consideration that we want to have when we're talking about potential things to look at. We have restrictions based on different zoning within the city. So fueling stations are allowed in mixed use corridors, mixed use downtown corridors. Those are both conditional uses. And so I put a note up there that conditional uses are reviewed by Planning and Zoning Commission and the decision is appealable to City Council. So there is an additional process that goes along with that. Similarly, the asterisk marks that there are use-specific standards also that apply. And then in the mixed-use employment and mixed-use regional centers, fueling stations are permitted again with those use-specific standards. And then there are a couple of requirements additional regarding the setback to schools, daycare centers, residential uses, or residential zoning districts. So that's 250 feet. That's in place currently, and that'll be relevant when we look at the examples in a minute. So I just wanted to highlight that too. Okay, don't freak out about this. Again, this is a lot. This is just language that Grant pulled together with some examples just for options for us to consider. These are all local examples from Denver, Lakewood, Louisville, Broomfield, and Westminster. You'll see most of the code requirements regarding fueling stations are what we call separation requirements. And so there's either a separation requirements to those protected spaces like schools and places in which people congregate, or separation requirements between fueling stations themselves. So they can't be co-located within a certain distance of another fueling station. Denver also had an added use here that they put on, which was to use fueling stations, like the potential for an exemption to their separation requirements to address food deserts in Denver. And so they were saying, if you were to bring in a food retail type amenity that meets certain requirements, they may provide you an exemption for those separation requirements. So to think about that as potentially a tool that you could use to drive other things if you wanted to create that exemption with those requirements. So again, Lakewood has 1,000-foot setback between another fueling station. Louisville has 1,000 feet as well. Broomfield has 1,000 feet. They also have they have some more detail in terms of what happens in a single intersection. So you can have two at one intersection if you can't access one because of the way that medians and whatnot work. And then Westminster had a half a mile, although this is no longer in effect. Up on the top right, you'll see that protected facilities are called out in these examples, which is just in the Denver example, is at 300 feet. So going back to our current code is 250 feet. And then between fueling stations, the range that's listed in these local examples is between 1,000 feet and half a mile. And then just a call out on the left that Longmont has separation requirements for those protected facilities, but not between fueling stations. And then this is a bunch of examples, separation requirement examples from other communities outside of Colorado. Again, we don't need to read through all of those. What I did was essentially summarize the range of all of these examples just for reference for you all. So the range of separations between fueling stations is 300 feet to 750 feet. The most common is between 5 and 700 feet. Again, just between these examples. I'm sure there's others. Interestingly, the front range examples are much higher than that. So those separation requirements for the front range are over 1,000 feet. I don't know the exact reason for that, other than my assumption would be because of our air quality issues on the front range. And again, Longmont doesn't have those separation requirements. These are a ton of additional examples on that kind of protected facility. So things like schools, playgrounds, places where people congregate. Again, that is due to air quality and fugitive emissions from gas stations. The range here is pretty expansive, 100 feet to 1,000 feet. Again, the most common within these examples is 300 to 500 feet. And again, for reference, ours is 250 feet currently. And then there's a couple of other types of examples. So there's separation requirements for water quality. So there are a couple of examples in particular, Salt Lake City and in North Carolina, they had setback requirements with regards to storage tanks and water bodies. I did check in with our environmental affairs folks to see if the state, like our Department of Health and the Environment, had any sort of state requirements to that effect, which they don't currently. There's monitoring that's in place, but not setback requirements. I highlighted the Salt Lake City one just because I thought that was a good one that we could potentially consider. There's two examples locally around limiting station, like the number of stations. And I apologize, I thought I made that clear enough to see, but it's kind of small. This is not easy to administer, not particularly effective. Again, this one in Westminster is no longer in effect. But Louisville essentially said there can only be 6 gas stations within the entire community, maybe 7 with certain exceptions, and then a bunch of caveats. Westminster had some limitations with regards to the number per 10 acres, so just a different type of approach in limiting the actual number of fueling stations that can be in their communities. And then Louisville also had a requirement that any new gas station that went into place also had a certain number of electric vehicle charging stations that they had to install as well. There is a new state law that does require new development to have a certain number of electric vehicle charging as well based on number of parking spots. And so that would be something to consider if that requirement essentially would be a requirement by default because of that state legislation and exactly. So, do you happen to know off the top of your head if gas stations would be required to follow that, or is it just multifamily and commercial type properties? Just multifamily. Okay, so that would not apply to gas stations. So that's a consideration.
Lisa, quick question. If the state already has a regulation, does it need to be in our local code?
Well, that was my question to Zach, and it doesn't apply, it wouldn't apply to fueling stations, that regulation that the state has. So that's for multifamily properties.
But not commercial properties.
Not commercial?
Correct.
Okay, correct. Yes, I should know that, but I don't.
Stick around.
So those are examples that we've been able to bring forward. I went through all of those and categorized them in these different areas. And this is just a summary here for you all to discuss. Again, those separation requirements, I brought these forward as options for you all to consider. Also, if you all have other thoughts or ideas, please feel free to bring it forward. Yeah.
Have you come across any consideration of the size? I mean, I would assume between 4 pumps and 16 pumps, there's a big difference. And codes differentiate that at all?
Not that that'd be a question for Grant, not that I've seen, but
Not from at least the jurisdiction. That's a good point.
yeah.
I mean, one thing comes to my mind is that the regulations for 4 pumps should be different than 16 pumps.
Like you would have tiered regulations
Yeah,
based on size,
exactly.
perhaps. So the separation requirements, based on what we've seen, the examples we've seen could be amending that existing setback for those protected facilities to align with more common requirements. So again, ours is currently 250 feet. Other front range examples were again 1,000 plus feet. What I didn't have a ton of time to research is how people are coming up with those numbers. So that would, if you all wanted to consider that, I probably want to do a bit more research to understand based on the air quality data or understand from other communities. I wouldn't want to just pick a random number. So what's the justification if we wanted to change that number? So that's just my thought to share with you all. Adding another setback requirement, again, between fueling stations, so we don't have anything in place currently with regards to that, and that is a pretty common code requirement. I would want to make sure we're providing exceptions for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, so we're not hindering ourselves from that build out, which we're also trying to promote, and then potentially consider a setback requirement for water bodies. we do have a number along, 119 that are pretty close to the highway, so I'm not sure how often that might be based on zoning. They may not be allowed in those places anyway, so that's something I would want to run past planning folks, but definitely something to consider. Possibility of a limitation of the number of stations, again, from what I've heard from planning folks, and feel free to jump in, Grant, that isn't very effective and would probably be difficult to administer that. I don't know if you have other thoughts to share on that particular approach.
No, I think you summed it up well. It could be, but of course, we always hope for it's easy to quantify and it's easy to administer and enforce.
Right. Yeah. Electric vehicle charging requirements, so we could recommend including EV charging requirements for new fueling stations or expansions and modifications of existing stations. Potentially using fueling stations as a tool to incentivize other goals. There probably need to be a lot more research and conversation about how we wanted to do that. That is one that I think we want to understand and be careful on. Yeah.
Use the Denver example. I wanted to understand what other goals you might be thinking about.
Yeah, so in that one, and I can go back to that slide. So, and this is just also a function of, Denver's a huge city with different issues than we have. They have a lot of food, what are considered food deserts in Denver. So areas where people can access like fresh fruits and vegetables, affordable healthy food. And so this was, let's see, there was a possible exemption if people were including food sales or market retail sales, service, and or service and repairs. So it was essentially an opportunity to provide an exemption if that facility was also meeting that food access need within the communities identified in Denver. Yeah.
I'm curious about the food desert definition, seeing that I don't think there's many neighborhoods in Longmont where the majority of people could walk 2 miles to a grocery store. And Denver, I know that the grocery stores are closer than that.
I don't know that scenario that I haven't been part of for many years. It used to be, I want to say, a mile radius, but I don't know. I know even at that time there was conversation about whether or not that was really functional. There is a formal definition from the USDA. I just haven't looked at it for a while. And like I said, I'm not saying we would look at that example. It's just something to look at. Would you want to use it? I don't like Denver's a different city again with different issues. I just wanted to put it out there as, an example of, again, I think it would need more research and discussion if you wanted to move in that direction, but it's an example of what other communities are doing.
Are there some cities that have banned all new gas stations?
I think I have heard of some. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. I think Louisville would probably be the closest to that, where they've set a number on it and said you can't have more than this number. I don't think that's very common from what I've seen.
Isn't Louisville very constricted geographically? It's considerably smaller than.
It's very, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, what is it, 20 square miles or some silly number.
I don't know geographically, but I would just say it's like 11,000. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm gonna make that number up. Yeah, so it's quite a bit smaller than Longmont, also different constraints. But I'm not, other than that, I'm not.
In Petaluma, California, so they banned gas stations there.
Yeah.
Have you counted how many exist in Longmont currently?
Say that again, sorry.
Have you counted how many fueling stations there are currently in Longmont?
Oh, no, I don't know. I have an idea.
I saw 17 on Google Maps, but I don't know if that's all of them.
I would guess it's probably more than that, but I guess I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's kind of the way it's worked. I mean, you're encouraging for people to drive further to get gas and increasing the, which traveled by doing that.
Yeah, potentially if you start, those are some of the unintended consequences that I think we need to consider if we were to go that type of. Yeah, go ahead.
I am looking at this and thinking about the overdue Envision Longmont process and wondering how much of what we're doing here is cart before the horse. There has been discussion. I've had this discussion with several current and former city council members about working it into the NGLA approach so that there's more participation in neighborhoods. I think that there's a lot of these discussions that there need to be a lot more input than, I was in the last one and it was an atrocious process and it did not represent the neighborhoods. And I don't know why we're going into something that's so embedded in how we conceive of our city when we need to redo that process.
So I think that's a really good point. I think I will call your attention back to what the proposal is essentially you all crafting a position statement, which could very well include, here are our thoughts and potential recommendations. We also recommend this be considered in a broader context when the envisioned comprehensive plan is updated, which I think is a really good way to, I mean, that's supposed to be the comprehensive way in which we look at land use, right?
Yeah.
I will look again to Grant to share if you all have updates on when that process might be happening, so.
Readily have an update with respect to timing.
I think it's 10 years, it would be next year.
I can just clarify that it's not budgeted for this year, so that will be ongoing discussions with respect to timing of the project. But yeah, I can't commit to it. It'll absolutely be next year. So, but to your point, yes, it is typically a 5 to 10 year cycle.
Next year would be 11 years.
It'd be 10 years, it was done in 2016.
Yeah, so next year would be, yes, technically 11 years. So it should be budgeted next year.
So, any of these cities that have had separation rules, like what have been the unintended consequences? I can imagine, I personally don't want a whole lot more gasoline fueling stations around, but at the same time, I don't want to allow the people who already are there to have the opportunity to let their facilities fall to disrepair because there's no competition. Any understanding of some of the unanticipated negatives associated with this?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think Corkut brought up a good example of, are we inadvertently driving, no pun intended, but driving people then to access things, further out. I mean, I think we are getting relatively close to build out, and Grant, feel free to jump in and correct me, but from a geographic standpoint, we're trying to maintain those buffers, and I think we're relatively there. We have a few pockets kind of in outer areas, so I don't know that is as much of an issue, but I think that if you all landed on where you wanted to go with this, that's exactly what we would want to dig into and get your perspectives from that. Like I haven't thought about the point that you just brought up, but also there's probably some other internal folks that would have some good perspectives on some of those unintended consequences.
These are some pretty complex issues. There's issues of competition.
Yeah.
There's issues of, restrictions that prevent business. Do we have to come up with recommendations, or would it be, or could we just come up with areas of concern that the council needs to address?
I think it's really going back to the proposal is a position statement. And so it's pretty high level. So it would be, we think X, Y, and Z should be considered. If council wants to take that up, then they would then direct staff to do that and to look into that further. You all do not need to have all of this figured out, but definitely to be able to flag, we believe there might be some significant unintended consequences, and we would want to make sure that those are adequately addressed before moving forward. Or to Mary's point, we think this is beneficial to look at in a broader land use concept. That's up to you all to include in whatever statement goes to city council. Let me go to.
I just want to briefly reinforce everything Lisa just said. In terms of like what to focus on right now is the position statement. And I think what's fair game there, absolutely. Like the unintended consequences discussion, market dynamics, if you want to figure out what questions, even if it's not unintended consequences per se, but questions that you think if council directs staff to go further down this and explore more like a policy or code change, what questions should we absolutely make sure to consider looking into? Everything there that people are unearthing here and having this conversation, very much fair game, and I appreciate that discussion.
Thanks, Councilmember Pine. Yeah.
Do you have any information on environmental safety features or best practices that gas stations have either in the city or other cities?
There were some examples about making sure that, and there are some, pardon me, in that slide, and I can share these slides with you all so that you can read through those details. around making sure that some communities require gas stations to be housed in like a garage type facility. I'm not familiar with that, but and that language might be something I'm not familiar with, but or have a canopy over it. There are some features that are around having some technologies in place for better capture of fugitive emissions. So those would be kind of the health and safety measures that at least I'm familiar with.
I used AI to come up with a matrix of different environmental evaluation standards, like in path
Oh, great.
it's just
Yeah,
a
thank you.
draft.
So yeah, perfect.
I mean, this is my personal opinion, but as a recommendation, we urban designers don't like gas stations because, a lot of curb cuts, it's not pedestrian friendly, et cetera, so forth. But there's another discussion lately in the field, 15-minute city idea, that is to say, how comprehensively self-sufficient can we be in certain territory? And when you exclude certain items out of that, life becomes less resilient. So I would encourage to accommodate, and that would be the way to go. That is to say, let's limit size, let's put some requirements, such as the air quality. That is, I saw some pumps in California they have these plastic gadgets. You can't really overflow. I mean, it's really well controlled. Maybe those kind of requirements. That is to say, if you're coming into this particular territory within the city, you need to fulfill certain things. You cannot be 16 pounds. You can be only this amount. Then you really need to take care of some of the conditions, and then you can focus on those conditions.
I think that makes really a lot of sense instead of restricting what we're concerned about in the broader 30,000 foot view is how it impacts our community. There's benefits to these stations and there's impacts from them. And so by being thoughtful, what Corkin said makes perfect sense. By being thoughtful about what are the things that limit the impact, then we have to be less concerned about limiting actual businesses.
Yeah, and that's what kind of to what you were saying. I think it is important to separate out traditional fossil fueling stations and EV fueling stations so that we can target those impacts as well. Because I think part of it is, I think it's critically important that standards that restrict gas stations because of air quality and because of these issues are not being applied to the EV stations that don't have those impacts. The second thing I was going to mention too, though, to one of those issues, the land use issue, is that just where we're headed, any gas station we build is a gas station that's going to have to be unbuilt at some point, and that requires environmental remediation.
Yeah.
And so I think part of this needs to be that we aren't building gas stations without a plan and the funding already in place to make that remediation happen. Because what we're seeing, even in our community, but communities all over, is that when these gas stations close, the land can't be reused, and then you have an abandoned, toxic hazard sitting in our community that no one wants to pay.
Daniel, that's such an interesting point. I'm in the precious metals business.
Yeah.
And you can't do a mining project anywhere in the world without a reclamation.
Exactly.
I never thought of
There
that.
should be reclamation plans for the gas stations, and they should have to put the funding up front to make that happen. Because when these stations close, they're not going to be in a financial position to do the remediation themselves unless we sue for it.
And Grant, I think you brought up that was also one of the reasons for the separation requirements, if I'm recalling correctly, was in part to not have an entire area that essentially has that remediation issue, right? You're not having an entire intersection then that inhibits development in the future. Was I understanding you right?
Yeah, and I think probably dual purpose, and I referenced the Westminster standard, the prior Westminster standard that had similar requirements that, again, not impact an entire intersection. As Cork had mentioned, a lot of that is also urban design. Do you want that look on a corner? Do you want roadways, et cetera? But yeah, absolutely. In terms of remediation long term, I would concur. It's not if, it's when. So that would at least alleviate the concentration.
Yeah. I've looked this up actually regarding
I don't know how many hundreds or maybe it's thousands, I don't remember, almost 10 years ago, of wells and mining installations in Colorado alone that are now leaking. And what I discovered is that for gas stations, there is federal and state requirements in the taxes that are for cleanup. And I think evaluation matrix like Ethan just presented to us, this is excellent. I think that it would be worthwhile for the city to find out how much this is required. In fact, this is directed actually to planning. How much of these items are actually required and what the fueling, what the remediation funds are available and what the process is in case there's an issue. I think that would be interesting to know moving forward. I mean, you probably get a lot of that stuff in training to be a city planner.
Yeah, and I would just add, a lot of this is handled through the state and federal level.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I found out when I looked it up.
And if it'll keep up with the increasing number of stations that will close too,
Because
if that funding's in place.
The reason why I looked into it is that you guys, having looked at the appalling situation that we're in with mining, I mean, there's so many parts of this state that are, the whole town is an EPA site. That you don't hear that in the promo advertising for Colorado steam.
Okay. Are there other?
So
Okay.
building on what Kirk said, I'd like to see a geospatial analysis of where gas stations are located currently. If there are parts of the city that don't have gas stations where maybe be targeted for lack of restriction, like restrict gas stations where they exist already, but allow conditional use of gas stations where there aren't any currently, so people don't have to drive as far. That could save on mileage. Can you do that, or should I make a motion for it?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that could be part of when we come back in May. I can do that. I'm just thinking about if that I would assume would need to align with our zoning standards. I don't think that we could carve out one particular area. I think it would have to align with our zoning. Is that right, Grant? Or if there was an area already that had a bunch of gas stations versus an area that didn't, like, could there be restrictions based on how the number of gas stations? Also, I'm trying to think through, like, how would you administer that? So,
Yeah, it's doing the same. As you pointed out, strict through specific zoning, so without modifying areas of zoning or adding new zoning categories off the top of my head, that would probably be a method to do it. But yes, that would be a grand undertaking in terms of additional zoning categories within small pockets of the city, and then get into the question of whether or not spot zoning for specific uses or specific purposes. So yeah, from an administration standpoint, may not be the easiest, but we can definitely contemplate if there's another way to achieve that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but happy to explore.
I mean, it seems like it's getting essentially at the separation requirement, right? Where you would say, if there's already a gas station within whatever 500, 750,000 feet, you can't put another one there. But you can put one in a place where there's not already another gas station within that certain.
Right. Achieving something.
Yeah.
I was thinking the agreed distance is like 2 miles or so. If there's no gas station within 2 miles or 3 miles or whatever.
I mean, I can look into pulling a map like that. I mean, I don't know what the mileage across Longmont is, but it's not that. I know it's more than that, but it's not that big comparatively speaking to speed in that. But if that's something that you all want to attention to that.
I think one of my questions for the EV requirements is if the demand overlay is the same for EV charging stations as gas stations. And so what I'm wondering is, so in those other city requirements, they require on-site EV charging stations. But I'm wondering, is that the best place to put the EV station in that community, or is it, at the local Denny's instead? And so in which case with this recommendation, if we're recommending they be built on-site, or if there's some kind of mechanism where they're built in a high need place that's not necessarily associated with gas station.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Part of, again, the task at hand is pretty high level. So you all could make a recommendation to essentially say, we want to pull this out to look at further so that we understand if this is the best nexus. And also those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. It could be both and, right? Like we want them at the Denny's and we want them at the gas station, right?
Totally.
And that's also based on where are they currently, what are the trends as far as, needs. I would love to see them not in like the edges of dark parking lots. There's a reason why gas stations are located where they are, is because they are convenient. But that's my own personal opinion.
Can I make one clarifying?
Sure.
When we were talking before,
Mhm.
I might have been,
Okay.
but right now, there isn't a requirement for commercial uses to install EV chargers. So like a new gas station comes in, they are required to have an EV charger.
Oh,
That is an existing.
That's
Is that part of the-
Yeah, Sean, we were talking.
Oh,
That is currently Longmont policy. It's in code.
Yeah.
That is
Oh,
required.
great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
See?
Sorry, I thought we were talking about something.
Along those lines, is there specifics in terms of how many, in proportion, for instance, the number of electric vehicles there are in the community? Is there any provision for you need to put in, if you're putting in this many gas pumps, you need to have this many chargers?
The
There's not-
requirement is based on the number of parking
Parking,
spaces
yeah.
being added to a site. So if
There
I'm
are-
building a gas station and I'm adding 10 parking spaces, the calculation for the required infrastructure, and that goes beyond just chargers, but it's also meeting ready spaces and capable spaces. That calculation is based on that number of parking spaces.
There are calculators available to say, based on projections or based on existing registrations, how many chargers would you need of different types? There are calculators out there available that provide that type of information. That gets into some of our forecasting stuff around how many do we think might be present.
the logic behind requiring chargers in gas stations is that there are a lot of hybrids. You get the gas, I should get some electricity too, so that I can use less gas. And that's a good thing. We'll double it. That was
Yeah, hold on, Mary, let me have Councilmember pop in and then I'll go to Mary.
Yeah, thanks. This is just two comments here. One, I might encourage the board to think less about first of all, this conversation is really valuable, and I think we're focused on some really key things. I might encourage us to think less about specific distances and numbers at the moment from a policy standpoint, and more on like what types of questions and types of considerations or consequences to focus on, because I think that's what I'm hearing is the most valuable thing coming out of this discussion already. And then just building on this most recent discussion about the EV charger locations, you start to run into issues of consumer behavior and behavior science as to who's going to charge where and what types of vehicles, to Corkett's point before, might be interacting with this use. There's the state law requirement that Longmont is complying with. And then there's one other aspect that I've been thinking about and want to introduce to this discussion, which is like, we have a policy mechanism, if you will, called a fee in lieu structure for certain things in the city where there's a requirement, but if you pay a fee in lieu of that, the city gets those funds and you don't, and that's considered meeting the requirement. There could be an option here where if we don't think maximizing the number of electric fueling stations at a certain place is appropriate, but we want to give that, or we want to give the option there to opt out of that based on site design, consumer use, or resident behavior, we create a mechanism where you could opt out of that by paying a fee in lieu that could then be reinvested in other sites where we think that might make more sense to locate or co-locate electric fueling stations. So just wanted to introduce that option as well to the board to think about what might be within the possible range of ideas and considerations here.
Mary.
The last time I looked at the active development log at the number of different developments, multi-unit developments were in process that had chosen fee in lieu versus actually building the, 12% or 1% or 1 in 12
For affordable housing.
for affordable housing. It was 100% fee in lieu. I have a very jaded perception of Longmont's ability to set in place and manage fee in lieu programs based on what's happened through that whole process in the 10 years I've been living here. So while I think it's a great idea in concept, I think that sorry, I'm gonna be a broken record and say, I think we'll get the biggest bang for our buck if what we suggest as a board is that we recommend that the city begin planning now and creating the budget now for a 2026 Envision Longmont process that asks very focused questions about what we would like to see in terms of our business centers, community centers, food and fuel refueling centers across our neighborhoods, and how we would like to and ask our neighborhoods, residents and businesses to consider how they would like to see our city and our society shaped based on those decisions. So I would recommend that we come up with a decision to that, a bird's eye view kind of higher order set of questions related along those lines. And I would like to see this board recommend that for the sake of sustainability in the city, and for using whatever land we have left in the most conscious and appropriate way, that we recommend that the city begin looking at the Envision Longmont process sooner.
Councilmember Popkin, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I'll just clarify. Mary brought up a useful point on the fee and lieu structure, and when it's, and what really I think is at your core there is what's the appropriate level. If it's set at a certain level, it'll be opted for more often. If it's not at an appropriate level, it might be about a different. You're striking a different balance of whether that's the approach versus not. Here, we should be conscientious of the fact that a certain mechanism could be applied differently for different policy goals, and it's successful or useful in different means. For instance, if our goal is to more appropriately direct or provide flexibility to the city to figure out where vehicle charging stations should be and create funds to invest in that, this could be a useful mechanism to achieve that. If our goal is to try to have try to ensure that more stations are just being built with the project as it's being built, then you want to think about what the level or whether you even want that policy in the first place, right? And so that's a function of the goal you're trying to achieve with the mechanism that you're looking at. I will also note, just for clarification's sake, on the development log, I believe, and Grant, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we recently had a presentation where since the 2023 update on the fee and lieu, just for the affordable housing piece specifically, it's closer to 50-something%, I think now, of projects that are opting for the fee and lieu versus actually building the affordable units. So the percentage has meaningfully shifted in terms of what developer options they're opting for. So again, that just goes to speak to the specific mechanism, what the mechanism is set at, and what the goal or function that you're trying to achieve is.
I'd be lying if I said that I could quote the specific percentage, but I do believe you are correct, Councilman.
So how did it's not on topic, but how did you get so many, I mean, I looked at just a couple months ago and there were none. How did you get so many on board with actually building affordable housing in the last few months? What has changed?
And I think what the council member is referring to is a longer time frame than just what is showing up on.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't understand that. Got it.
So what are our next steps with this?
So I mean, to that.
Yeah.
I would suggest.
Yeah.
As a conclusive policy, that really I think is that instead of just focusing on the separation, is focusing on this is a great list. Thank you, Ethan. Leak and spill prevention, vapor emissions and control. What can we control so that we can accommodate them better? That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is to really understand frequency of it on the map. So if we put in between two gas stations, a mile separation or 2 mile separation, what does it mean? And you know, in GIS it's so easy to create those maps. We can see that visually, and we can make that decision much clearer, like 1 mile or 1.5 mile, whatever that is.
Right, you can see where are there pockets left, or are you effectively saying no more gas stations can come in, right?
I mean, I think we should ask, I'm thinking of the frustration that everyone in my neighborhood who attended together at the Envision Longmont process. We weren't asked questions like, are there grocery stores and gas stations close enough to you? Would you like to have the grocery store and the gas station in the same location? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that we should be suggesting some questions for the Envision Longmont process so that the neighborhoods can decide these questions. The process, the way that we experienced seemed like a Delphi process where we were fed a bunch of leading questions that were irrelevant to us, that we were giving yes and no answers to, or a short answer that had nothing to do with what our actually being able to say, this is what we want in our neighborhoods. And so I'm recommending that this council recommend, this committee recommend a more sophisticated, bottom up, run through the NGLA, which is 66 neighborhoods. How many neighborhoods is it?
It's 50 some registered neighborhoods.
Yeah, and there could be another 24.
Yeah, there's probably 90 some neighborhoods across the
Okay, so almost 100 neighborhoods. If we were running it through that process, we would actually get people telling us what they want and then planning for where the gas stations go and whether or not they should be, you know, maybe what people want is for them to have a dog food dispensary. I mean, who knows? We should be asking our neighborhoods.
So I think what I'm hearing, and I think Councilmember Popkin, yeah, do you want to go ahead and jump in?
Great minds, Lisa, great minds. Here's what I'm hearing. There are very specific questions and concerns and potential unintended consequences flagged specifically on the fueling station topic. There are also some questions and concerns regarding the Envision Longmont process and the engagement process there. I might suggest that the board, I would strongly encourage the board to separate those questions out, because I don't think it's irrelevant for the board to comment on that from a board scope standpoint on either of those. But I do think we might want to focus on the fueling station question and charge before the board first, or not necessarily first, but focus on that and separately focus on this board's comments and feedback for the Envision Longmont process. I can also just say right now, I'm hearing that the board has an interest in being involved in the Envision Longmont process. As someone who has been on the Planning and Zoning Commission before my council role, I see immense value in having a lot of boards weigh in on that process. So I don't see why that would be excluded from the process at all, once that is in the position to actually start to move forward and plan the engagement strategy and really pull in different perspectives. So I can report back to council, Mary, that is of interest to this board. I don't think we have any intent of excluding SAB from commenting and being part of that process as well. So that's my suggestion here. Let me know if I'm not capturing something that was suggested here, though, between those two buckets.
Well, is it of interest to this board that we be actively engaged in the...
Before we ask that question, can I make a slight modification and also a comment? So we have had budget for a handful of years to update the sustainability plan, which we would like to do concurrently with the Envision Longmont plan, because those things are so interlinked. So this board would be involved in that process by that nature. Sustainability and resilience are the two primary tenets of the Envision Longmont plan. So I don't know that, I mean, yes, please, Councilmember Popkins, share that information with the rest of the city council that this board, and to Mary's question, we could go back to that. I think with regards to this in particular, I do agree with Councilmember Popkin. I don't know that they have to be separate. If you all are on board with what Mary is saying, I think it makes sense from a broader land use standpoint, because there are other factors that might involve that, would be to have your position statement that has two components to it. The first of which is to say, and I think I might flip it from like maybe not saying this specificity, But these are the things that we think need to be considered further with regards to fueling stations, health and like public health and environmental safety, this kind of list that I jotted down a list of some of the things that you all recommended.
Combined services,
Yeah.
neighborhood centers, yeah. that kind of-
But more like that, and then, so they have something to act on, and then you could also include we believe that this might be best addressed during the Envision Longmont process when we can look at land use more broadly. That way they have a way to act regardless of when Envision Longmont might happen, because, I'm sensitive to what Grant said earlier. I want to be realistic about where we are at with regards to budget and we're going into the 2026 budget cycle. I don't want to speak out of turn, Becky, so if you want to jump in on the budget standpoint, that's not an insignificant budget request to update Envision Longmont, and we are facing a lot of budget constraints. So I also want to make sure that we're not inhibiting our ability to do anything, because then we're waiting for, in undetermined amount of time for the Envision Longmont update to happen. Are you all on board with that approach? Because I can craft something for the next meeting that you all can react to. Does that capture your concern, Mary? I just want to be
It's left out the NGLA part. I do think that that's really important.
I agree with you. I think that we can, if you want to add that in, I don't want to overly prescribe what the engagement process for Envision looks like, because that's not my world. That's planning's to lead. I mean, you can share that feedback, or we can incorporate the need to make sure that neighborhoods are engaged in that process or something like that. I can build that into that language. If that approach makes sense for you, I'm happy to do that between now and the next meeting, and you all can react to it. And if it's totally off base, we don't have to adhere to that timeline. We can push things out if the conversation needs to shift.
I really think that makes a lot of sense, because it does identify the areas of interest so that they can be thinking about those things. And then the separate thing about making sure that it fits within the umbrella of Vision Longmont, they're not held up and seeing that these are topics that are of interest to us, that they should be considering. They could go ahead with that process without waiting until we get to the process, but make sure that we're identifying that they should be thinking about things in terms of the broader vision of that.
And I don't think, and to both of your points and what you're saying, Mary, is that I think part of this is that we can't wait. There's huge development. The developers are not waiting.
Right.
And where the developers go, the gas stations are going to follow, and the neighborhoods will start demanding them if we're not on top of this. And so I think it's urgent to make the changes we want to make to fueling stations while not waiting around, but being proactive about a bigger coordinating those demands from our neighborhoods and structuring the Vision Longmont.
And really, the changes in the plan, maybe 5%, like 3%, there's such a strong structure of the vision for the city now that they could be using as a context for starting to think about these issues, that as long as they're at least looking at the current plan, as long as they're going, it seems like we can keep things moving, because I think, Dan, you make a very good point. Development's going to continue. So we need to make sure we're on top of it.
If folks are good with that approach, is there anyone I don't think we need to make a formal motion, but we can do like thumbs up, thumbs down, both sides.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I will bring that back for folks next meeting. If you have thoughts between now and then, feel free to shoot them to me. I will get something. Oh, yep, Councilmember Poppin.
You can finish your thought.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I will make sure to get it into the packet before the meeting so you all can review and come with thoughts. Yes, Councilmember.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that I'm hearing two different topics and two different potential timeframes of recommendation. Is that correct? One with the long-term planning process in mind, and one with the short-term development timeframe in mind. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure I was hearing that correctly.
Yeah, actually, so because we were talking about two different timeframes, and to address Daniel's point about development continues at pace, even though there's not much land left to do much. We're going to be knocking down houses to put in gas stations at this point. I would like to So we have not done very much in the city of a survey process, like through the NGLA where folks are said, you know, to before the Envision Longmont process even gets going, if there is a concern right now that we have to update right now, the land use code around gas stations, why couldn't there be a survey that's promoted through the NGLA that goes out to the neighborhoods and folks can just put in their address and, you know, and say, yeah, we would like to have a gas station cluster. And maybe that's a way that we could start to have a more inclusive process now before we start planning the Envision Longmont process.
May I ask Becky about the quality of life survey or whatever it's called? You know, do you want to speak about that a little bit? I don't know if that would be an opportunity. Not to, I don't know about going that specific, but are there things in there that would surface some of those needs?
No, not that specific as to like services that you feel are missing. I mean, like we could incorporate those questions in the future by a new survey. We could do separate surveying.
Okay. When's the timeline for that? To go? Do you have a timeline for the next one?
So
Can you tell people what that is really?
Yes. So every other year we do a kind of a general customer satisfaction type survey. We did so last summer was the first time that we did that in-house. We are looking to diversify the survey instruments that we use and not kind of use that one every other year, kind of same set of questions thing. So we'd be happy to do something more targeted as council directs, to ask some specific questions or let council ask those questions. So yeah, I think we have a lot of opportunity to tailor something.
So that, I think this is an interesting idea. The Envision Longmont process, you know, it was sort of like the big meetings with the planners in the large room and, you know, like doing the small groups. And then sort of like the tail of that was online surveys and online focus groups. Maybe we could start the online surveys and focus groups beforehand as well. Rather than waiting to it to be sort of like the follow-up and the completion of the Envision Longmont process, which is how it seemed to have been done in the past.
I mean, I will say there was a lot more to that process. I don't want to
And there was the meetings with the neighborhoods, yeah.
But I will say again, this is a position statement. We can include language around the importance of having a community engagement process as part of this. And it will be up to council to
Let them sort out the details and
Direct.
address that.
direct staff appropriately.
But having it there, so it's in their awareness, is really makes sense.
In the interest of time, do we have enough of a direction to go
Yes.
forward? We got other items on the agenda we gotta get to.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank
Yes,
you.
we do. If you all are good, I'm good wrapping this.
Can I ask just functionally, are you allowed, when we give you feedback on this statement, can you integrate that feedback before the meeting, or is that not allowed? Slot?
No, you can send me feedback as long as you get it to me before I need to get it in the packet. Not
Well, I was thinking, can we review what you prepare, send you feedback, and then so that you have time to do a second?
no,
revision?
because I'm gonna tell you I'm not gonna be able to get it done.
Great.
I'm
That's
gonna
good
be
too.
going,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Me making an out loud commitment to get it into the packet is as far as I can.
No,
take
that's-
right now.
And we lose the benefit of the discussion if one person.
That's what I just
explains
wanted,
it.
That is true. Yeah, we could not do that as a collaborative process.
Oh, no,
Yes,
totally.
yeah.
Just-
Okay.
Well, up next on the agenda is public invited to be heard. I don't think we have any members of the public here anymore, so we will pull this on past them. Other business, finalize the date and location for the Regional Sustainability Council meeting in Longmont.
Yeah, so I checked into a few different places. A couple of the places that we looked into, wanted to charge us to use the space after hours. So we ended up going with the Twin Peaks Golf Course Clubhouse, which is over off of Cornell Drive. And they're also going to be providing the food and stuff for us, so that will be a cost that we'll do along with that. But we're looking at the food options right now. I was working with Ralph on to see kind of what was provided beforehand, but we do have that reserved for. We decided to go on Thursday, May 15th, just because Tuesday night is a council night and I didn't want to conflict with that. So it will be on Thursday, May the 15th. We have the building, or we'll have the clubhouse from 5 p.m. until 8:30, I think. So we have some time to do setup in there, as well as do cleanup after the event. So
Yeah, and we were talking about who the speakers might be and the topics. I just wondered where we were at on that. Because of the steering committee, we had a meeting last week, Front Range Sustainability Council, the steering committee met last week, and they're waiting. I told them, wait till we have our meeting and I'll get back with them to confirm the date, because they want to save out send a date, notice to everybody on the list. So what do you think? Or, if we have to, if that's not determined yet, then we can just let them send out, say the date, and these are the topics and the speakers, and the program will be filled in between now and then. But what are we thinking about that?
I'm happy to commit to that as a speaker, and I'm happy to introduce kind of Longmont sustainability efforts. I think the other area of focus was the zero waste work.
Yeah.
So I will try to see if Nicole from my team is available. If not, I feel fine also doing that if you all just want to listen to me talk for a long time, but for August, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Would you do me a favor and just write the topics and just the names, however you would like it to be phrased, and I'll send that directly through the steering committee and to the Front Range Council.
Yes, Ralph, if you do not, when do you need that?
By Friday, maybe.
Yeah,
just so I don't make up something. It turns out it's not what we're doing. If you can't do it by Friday, don't worry about it.
If you don't hear from me, I'm a little underwater this week. I will do my best. If you don't hear from me,
Don't feel
please,
pressure.
well, just send me. Don't hesitate to bug me about it. So I will do my best. I'm sorry. I'm just
No
trying to be
problem.
real with
I
people about
Please do.
and then
We have more than enough to start moving this forward.
Okay, perfect.
Ralph, question for you. The actual event time is what time?
I want to talk to the steering committee. In the past, they've started about 5:45, but
Yeah.
most of them have taken place during winter months. I'm really thinking that we would have people come around 6, keep us in 6 to 6:30, make presentations from 6:30 to around 7:10, give people 20 minutes to a half hour to network and talk to each other, and be on their way home by 7:30 to 8 o'clock, because it'll still be light out. So I want to confirm that with the board, make sure they're okay, but that's what I'm thinking.
Ralph, who's invited? Is it just the advisory boards or?
Well, if I may, because I attended one,
Yeah.
most of the cities don't have advisory boards.
Well, and that's.
They have like one employee who's got an office in the service center,
Yeah.
and they're desperately trying to get some airplay with city council to get budget to do universal health.
And
I
that's what I'm
pretty
wondering,
much.
is if that invitation list can maybe be expanded to city staff, for instance. It's like, so that, even if for the ones that do have a board, if they want to bring their Lisa with them, if they want to bring, their Zach with them, if that
There
would
were a
help
lot
with
of-
networking.
There
too.
were a lot of city staff in the past.
Yeah, I think in
simply
one of
because
these
they just
meetings,
don't
certainly
have-
there's, or whenever the town was in, there was always city staff there. So I'm happy to make the recommendation to them that each of these communities, the advisory boards contact any city staff.
Yeah.
and find them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea.
Okay.
And yeah, if cities don't have an advisory board like that, if they have a
Most of them
sustainability person. Because I think that's maybe the power with these regional meetings too, is to get as many of those network players together. So they knew, as we were talking today, it's like, do you know Brett from Boulder? And it's like, well, maybe
Brad.
here,
It's Brad, isn't it?
No, it's Brett.
Brad.
Brett.
See, it's still doing that. We should have invited Brett.
I did Brad.
One quick point on this, because I know it's getting late, that we might want to think about. This council has the opportunity to do some really great things, but it's pretty disorganized, and I've been like herding cats, and I'm going to be leaving, our board, and I may not be involved in that anymore. So, one thing that as a board, we may want to think about is to what degree we want to continue, because somebody's going to have to do the lifting on this if I'm no longer part of this board. There is a lot of opportunity, and you can see there's a huge need. And Longmont's really a leader, as I've mentioned before, as I've seen some of the communities like Erie and Broomfield and Westminster, as I've met people in these communities, I realize how much Longmont has to offer to people along the Front Range. There is, I don't know much about this, you guys might know more, there is a staff-related coordination along the Front Range. And none of our people at our steering committee seem to really understand what that is. But to the degree to which you think there's value to this, it could disappear because I've been a pretty strong moving force in it. And so you guys might just be thinking about, is this worth being involved in? Does anybody want to keep making it happen? Because there's a lot that could be done. But right now it's mostly just educational and network.
Yeah.
And someone's gonna have to replace me on the SNS, which is turning into something else for looking at the grant applications for the neighborhood stuff. It's turning into some, I don't know what's happening. We should bring Guillermo in soon, probably, right, Lisa? Explain what's happening there.
Not so we can explain what's happening. It's getting there, but it's still
Okay.
got some tweaks to be made and stuff. So when it is finalized, yes. Okay,
We good on that topic?
Yes, thank you. And I'll let you know the time, Heather, after I get
Okay.
steering.
And thank you so
Yeah.
much. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Up next, Lisa, we have the construction and demolition ordinance update.
all right, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. Yes.
Exciting.
I was trying to last my computer. So we went to council on April 8th to do the 2024, to run through the 2024 annual report. As I talked to you all about, one of the focus areas that we wanted to highlight for them was where we're at with our waste diversion numbers because of their relatively recently updated zero waste resolution that set some pretty ambitious waste diversion targets. And we have a year and a little more under our belt with regards to implementation of the universal recycling ordinance. So we provided an update to city council on that. We showed them how the three areas that are really gonna impact our waste diversion rates are in the residential, commercial, and construction demolition sector, demolition sector. Our residential number is staying pretty stubbornly flat, and so we're looking at some different things to impact that. Our commercial waste diversion numbers have gone up significantly, so we are really seeing the impact of the universal recycling ordinance, which is really exciting to see. And then the other area where we've seen a significant decrease, although it wasn't that high to begin with, was in the construction and demolition sector. So that was about 6% last year, or in 2023 of diversion, and it dropped to 3%. So that is and it has pretty substantial impact because of the volume of construction and demolition materials. And so we asked council if they wanted to provide direction to the city to pursue construction and demolition ordinance. A lot of other communities along the Front Range are also looking at that. There's some model ordinances that have been developed. Recycle Colorado has a subcommittee devoted to construction and demolition. And so council did direct staff to pursue that. So we are going to be working on that over the next several months. We'll definitely bring that to you all for feedback as it makes sense. We'll do a lot of that stakeholder engagement with those impacted parties in particular. So just wanted to provide you all with a quick update on that because it was an exciting development for us. So.
I live on the historic east side where there's been a persistent problem with folks just demoing their houses because they just feel like putting up something new, and there being very minimal penalty for doing so and almost no enforcement. I haven't looked into this in a year or so. Mm-hmm. And for example, some of these houses have asbestos in them or whatever, and they just get knocked down. I would like to know how this process of getting approval to knock down these historic buildings is going to tie into what you just brought up.
So it would essentially make a requirement that a certain percentage and or certain types of materials have to be recycled. There's one of the mechanisms by which to enforce that is through like a deposit mechanism.
But my question is, I would like to see how this would impact whether or not they get a fee and how they get the fee to demo the building. Do you understand what I'm saying?
We couldn't require someone to not demo a building unless it has historic significance. What it would say is if you are going to demo a building, this requires that those materials be a certain percentage or certain types of materials be recycled. And there are mechanisms to build into that to ensure the enforcement of that.
So
Is
when
that-
well, I mean, some of these buildings, there wasn't even a permit, they're just knocked down. I mean,
I can't speak to that. I'm not in the permitting department. I don't know if Becky, if you have thoughts. That would be, I know they're planning on different
too
tenure,
bad,
so
so I might
I know.
their history then.
Grant left permitting.
We should have a permit to deconstruct or construct. I mean, that's a serious.
That is a serious violation.
I'm telling you, you guys would not believe it. I mean, there was no penalty at all. They were just like, well, we need to, and one of them happened recently. I don't know all of the details, but I do know that it was,
Baker.
yes,
Yeah.
Fourth and Baker.
Yeah.
So that's on the city's radar apparently.
Yeah.
Okay,
Is there a front process being built in with, so that can't happen again?
I would say not related to the C&D piece. I mean, I think
There should be.
well, there's already a requirement that
Right.
happens.
So if folks are already not observing the permit requirement, then the construction and demolition things aren't valid. However, there is some discussion about increased permit enforcement and proactive enforcement, because right now, a lot of those things are on a complaint basis, which complaints were received.
And I just have to say that this Turkey side, we've put a lot of effort for decades into documenting the historicity of every building over there. So they are historic buildings.
But they have to have designation as such in order to be protected.
Well, there's so many different levels of designation. This is a whole conversation.
Well, I don't want to get into
Yeah.
that's a whole different level.
Out of our ability, unfortunately.
Yes. But thank you for bringing that up. I think that if there's already requirements in place, that needs to go another direction. I don't want to put additional requirements into something like a construction demolition ordinance that oversteps requirements in another process. Because that would create confusion. Yes, Councilmember Popkin. Oh, okay. Okay.
Next item is Cinco de Mayo.
Yes,
volunteers meeting.
so Cinco de Mayo is coming up on May 3rd. We are going to have our trial run of a cooling tent. It might not be that hot, but the last time I went, it was very hot for Cinco de Mayo. So we'll see how it is. I haven't looked at the weather for the next couple of weeks, so I don't too far out anyway. But we are looking for volunteers. If any of you all want to join us on that Saturday, May 3rd.
What times?
That's a great question, and I meant to find out. It is 10, I want to say the event is 10 to 5, but anytime that you all are in that time frame, if you all are interested,
On Main Street, right?
at Roosevelt Park.
We can send a follow-up email with details and
Yeah.
people can let us know if they want
Is that okay? I
And-
apologize.
How would we be supporting?
Yep, so our this trial run of the cooling tent, so Zach from my team that I think you all have met before has gotten a few like misters. We're gonna be near the water station so that we can plug right into the water that's available there. That will also serve as a place to educate people about heat. So summer heat, so how to understand signs and symptoms of heat illness or heat stroke, and then resources and programs that are available for folks to do tree planting and indoor cooling and all kinds of stuff. So
There'll be papers, things that we can give.
So there'll be a staff
We don't have
person
to be
there.
experts in.
No, you absolutely don't. There'll be staff folks there. We'll have some of our members of the Equitable Climate Action Team there as well. We're just looking for a couple of extra hands if anyone wants to participate in that. It's just talking to folks.
Do we get a cool volunteer shirt?
I mean, we do have some cool shirts. I can't leave that promise, but
I don't have my calendar here, but if it's easy, could you just send out a
Yeah.
blurb?
yeah, we'll see that.
The date and the times and then.
Yeah, it's
May 3rd from 10:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
that's close. That's fine.
And are you looking for like 2-hour stints or stay as long as you can? Or-
Yeah, pretty informal. 2 hours stints, stay as long as you can. The minimum 2 hours, the maximum all day fun.
And the salary will be?
The t-shirt shirt.
Absolutely not.
You can say as
Commitment to the next phone.
There's.
The Mootopia white paper has been sent to Heather, so she could send that out.
Thanks, Ray.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
There is a book coming called Dirt, a Love Story,
Oh, I love it.
but this is an excerpt.
Awesome. On a side note, we're supposed to follow up with you all for the interviews for the board applicants. Right now, it looks like we have at least 5 candidates who will be are possible that we will be interviewing. So I think if we start the meeting an hour later next month. Well, we could start at 4, but then do the regular start at 4 for the interviews, and then do our regular meeting starting at 5 o'clock, if that works for everyone, or.
That's fine.
Right.
Okay, next up is items from the board. Does anybody from the board have any?
So, last week, the president signed a number of executive orders regarding energy and coal. And I had some time to analyze those. I believe that they present some risk of conflicting with the city and the region's energy plan. And so I have a motion to request legal counsel from the city attorney to provide evaluation of any financial or legal risks that could exist from these new executive orders, including the national energy emergency that was signed in January, and there's 4 new ones that have specific scopes regarding federal preemption, state regulations, as well as the possibility that the federal government could issue orders for coal capacity to stay online and not be retired.
I want to jump in really quickly to say that our legal folks are tracking all of that very closely. And with regards particularly to the executive order, I don't remember the number, but with the state overreach, there is no current effect from that. It could be a precursor to future litigation, but currently our path on that is statutorily mandated by the state currently, and is coming from our city council's directions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and our 100% renewable energy goal. And so, although there could be impacts down the line, there are not immediate impacts unless and until we see actual litigation from the state, which would then potentially come down to local jurisdictions. So I don't want to downplay the impacts to Longmont, but that is where we're at currently. I don't know, Councilmember Popkin or Becky, if you want to add in anything in terms of what our legal folks are already paying attention to, other than trying to track everything from one day to the next to see what the impacts to us are.
Can I clarify, we're talking about the closure of Rawhide, which is scheduled for 2029, and that, correct?
It is not in question now. It may, because that is again statutorily mandated by the state. So it could be called into question, and I think it's 2027 or 2029. And then I think there's a couple of other ones that are slated for 2027. There would have to be a litigated process, in which case the federal government sued the state of Colorado to stop those things from happening. There is also our city council's direction in terms of, and we are member owners of Collaborative Power Authority, and are differently governed in some regards. But please feel free to step in if I'm saying anything incorrectly. So it would also be, our city council would have to shift their priorities as well to change direction at this point.
And I would say that we would lean most heavily on PRPA's legal team, who would have the primary responsibility for understanding how PRPA would be impacted by this. It's probably not primarily the city.
You know, we.
Yeah, I'll just
Always.
jump in quickly. So everything Lisa said, and I'm following this both from city council hat as well as my day job, working with and directly advising cities on their climate action and energy and renewable energy strategies and utility engagement strategies. So if I hear anything from either of those worlds, I'll definitely make sure to bring this to our attention. I think there are probably, as Lisa articulated more clearly than this, but 5 to 10 different legal or policy other level steps that might have to happen before we have a different conversation here, before it's even probably worth this board spending a ton of time discussing this right now, including potential challenges just to those executive orders possibly. So I'd suggest that we hit pause before we spend time spinning wheels on that. It's not irrelevant. Board member Green, it's certainly a very relevant topic to what the risks are to the city, to PRPA, but there are a lot of different steps that might be necessary for this to be an informed conversation about what is worth spending time on right now. And as we've seen in just the last 80 days, many things that are announced also get changed, augmented, or reversed as well within certain periods of time for a variety of reasons.
And I also would say that I believe, and again, Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, that this process you all would need to make a recommendation to city council, because this board cannot direct staff. This board is an advisory board to city council. I will also say we need to be mindful of the capacity of our attorney's office at the moment, which, as you can imagine, with everything that's happening, is significant, and I wouldn't want to give them something they already are over capacity. So that this process, if you all took up this motion and voted for it, it would go to city council to then determine whether or not they would want to direct the attorney's office to do that.
I think in these instances too, the way information is being used to identify targets for litigation are important. And so I think it's also important to follow our legal team's views and not be telegraphing opportunities to target us. And so that's with the motion, again, not that it's not important, but even now on the record, that will be published, that will be findable by AI, whatever. These are the kinds of things they're looking for to identify targets in our communities now. And so part of it is I think we have to be careful with the conversations we have, especially in the state of Colorado where all of our documents are available.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I mean, maybe we need to just see whether we want further discussion or not. Ethan, did you make a formal motion?
And it sounds like this would have to be amended so that it would not go to, because we can't direct staff, that it would have to be amended anyway to, that we recommend to city council.
And I'm hearing that this is happening, right? Lisa's first comment was, this is already happening. Yeah.
I would like to have more discussion.
I think for the record that if this is a true motion that you're making, that it needs to be read into the recording so that everybody is aware, because this is a piece of paper that was distributed and it needs to be read into the record if you're making this a formal motion. At this point in time, it's just a conversation point for the board, but if it is a real motion, it needs to be read into the record.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on it. So in that case, I'll withdraw that motion and make.
I think you are obligated now to read it into the record because we've discussed it.
You can withdraw the motion.
Okay.
But
He
Ethan,
can withdraw the motion as the proposer, as a friendly amendment to his motion. He can just withdraw it.
So we don't have to share this document with the public?
Well, it will be included as a document that was submitted during the meeting,
Okay.
but in the minutes, it will reflect that he withdrew
it, but it's in the packet that's
Yes.
distributed. Okay, cool.
So I do have another document. This is a letter that was drafted by state representatives of the Fort Collins area.
the Platte River Power Authority requesting an independent energy assessment from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory before the consideration of the requested permit for 5 new gas turbines at the Rawhide site north of Fort Collins. And my motion is for this board to support the request and to echo the request for independent energy assessment from NREL.
Is there a second? So
I would like to second that.
let's have some discussion. Ethan, I don't really know what this is, so can you give me a little more background?
Well, there are a number of environmental groups who are opposed to the permitting of 5 new gas turbines. I think this letter kind of reflects those concerns that environmental groups have, and including that there would be an excessive reserve margin and that it could affect air quality, especially in Fort Collins, and the economic impacts, and the fact that NREL is a body that has like really solid technical ability to do these kinds of assessments. It's been requested not just by these representatives, but by a number of environmental groups.
Robert, can I speak to this?
Please.
There are some concerns about the equipment that's being permitted. But the decision that the Larimer County Board of Commissioners needs to make is not about the type of equipment. It's about the use of the property that Platte River owns. And so the question is, has Platte River followed all of the county's requirements, permit requirements? And if so, is there any reason to approve that permit because it's followed the process? So the question to the Board of Commissioners is not, is this an environmentally sound project? It's, has Platte River met the requirements? And so the Platte River Board has approved the IRP, which includes the equipment that is to be permitted for this property. And the commission either needs to approve or deny the permit based on the compliance of the process by Platte River.
I think what the representatives and some environmental groups are saying is broader than just that limited context. It also goes into the IRP itself and whether its basis is solid.
Right, but the question at hand for the commission is not the IRP. It's the use of the property that's not zoned for this use.
So to clarify, Susan, you're saying that we should separate the issues. The issue of whether or not there needs to be an additional review of the IRP and the resource mix is separate from whether or not is separate from the approval of the use of the land. Yes. These are two separate issues, and so I think that the NREL review is a worthy question, and I do see it as being separate from the permitting issue. However, if there does happen, Platte River and the member communities may have to adjust the timeline to allow for this review to go forth. Who knows? But it's a separate issue. Correct?
I have a question about our scope. We are advisory to the council, right? We cannot just directly communicate with the Larimer County. I mean, we would ask council.
That's right.
To
That's
support,
what it is. That's
If
what
you look at
it is.
3H of our bylaws, it says that we can request information that would support or oppose hypotheses that come up. So I think this is fully within that scope.
The IRP is already approved though, is that correct? So would there be any actual impact of doing this?
Good.
Our
What's the current motion?
Yes, thank you.
The
I
motion
should
is-
endorse this letter, right? Is that all?
No,
Well,
the
not
motion was-
exactly, it's to endorse the request for a independent review by NREL.
Of the IRP.
The motion was to ask city council to endorse.
By the letter for background context.
Does anyone, maybe you know these, has anyone actually spoken to NREL about this? Because my primary question right now, as they lose their funding, is who would fund the review? Are we also endorsing?
Yeah, I thought we talked about this.
We've already had this
Yeah.
motion and it was decided that we were not going to pursue that for the endorsing an independent review of the IRP, which has already been approved. I think that we've already talked about this and made a decision on that at a previous meeting.
It's not right.
I do think that, so. So you would just bring it up again in light of this letter, which showing that the idea of having this review is gaining steam, to see if we would be.
I don't remember this board having a vote on that before. I remember presenting the letter, which was full of lots of different, which may have included this as one point, but I think the text of the board was a letter as a whole, not to that specific point.
So I think I brought up the same point and had already been approved. We had this discussion previously. And I'm not being negative because I really like the idea of an independent evaluation. The question is, does it make sense for this board to take this up? And would we actually be able to do anything that would impact that? You've raised the question, and I think it's a very appropriate question. Exactly, is there an independent evaluation of what they presented? You have doubts about it. That's created doubts for me. I don't know whether or not this board is in a position to be able to do anything since the IRP is approved. So trying to figure out, is there a way that we can put attention on an evaluation, an independent evaluation that would make sense?
I suppose you would have to recommend that to city council. City council would have to then recommend through their representation on the Platte River Board, and then the Platte River Board would have to take it up. But our mayor did make a motion for this review, and there was no second, and it was not carried through.
I was just going to say exactly what Susan was saying there. The mayor pack did make a motion for this kind of independent review. I think specifically calling out NREL. There was no second at the PRPA board member meeting for this. And this is not just an informational request, right? This is what your motion was proposing a request for multiple entities, if not as for owner communities, effectively to request an independent review from a federal entity. That's not just an informational request. Can you give me this information about what this means? So I don't say that to deny you the ability to make this motion, but one, I think this is probably moot, given that Mayor Peck has already made this motion and it failed at the PRPA level. And two, I think this is effectively this is more than an informational request.
Chairman, can I call the question?
Sure, yeah.
Call the question. We have a motion and a second, and I call the question.
All those in support of this? And all those opposed? Okay. Thanks. Are there other items from the board? Seeing none, Councilmember Popkin, the next item up is items from council. Anything on your list?
Yeah, I just wanted to share some things actually PRPA related. So thank you, Board Member Augreen, for the lovely segue here. Two notes on this. One, and I think this was referenced already in the discussion, but wanted to just share for the record that council did take a vote to approve a letter to the Larimer County Commission process. That was that was last week. So I just wanted to let this board, I know you've been following this issue, as evidenced by this prior discussion. So that was a vote that passed 6-1 by City Council to recommend approval as an owner community for the proposal that was submitted. I'll share the second update, and then if there's any questions, happy to entertain questions on either topic. The other PRPA update is just a news effort, but some of you may have seen the news, but if not, there was a press release issued on April 9th that PRPA signed a contract with Nextera Energy Resources for 100 megawatts of 4-hour battery storage. So effectively 400 megawatt hours of energy storage as part of the energy storage goals for implementing a more reliable clean energy future. So I don't know a ton of details on the exact technologies there, but I can share any details out, or we can make sure that the press release is shared out with the board if that's appreciated.
Thank you.
We have a question.
Why did you oppose the letter?
Yeah, I was the lone no vote in that 6-1. I have voted to oppose it because based on my review of the IRP, I didn't feel confident that it was the optimal proposal there, or the optimal option, or that it was justified from a technical standpoint. There are multiple options, and it was a little bit presented to me on the fly. The letter was frankly that I would be supporting that proposal. I don't inherently think it's an unreasonable implementation strategy of the IRP, but I also was not convinced that it was the optimal pathway as modeled and justified by the IRP. If that distinction makes sense, happy to try to speak to that more if that's helpful. But if that's also a conversation I'm more than happy to take offline with anyone who's interested. I have professional experience reviewing IRPs as well, and did look at this one closely in a non-council capacity as a just concerned resident last fall. So it was largely building on the conversations I'd had with PRPA and LPC, as well as the review that I conducted there on my own.
Thank you. All right. Towards the end here, we did have some attachments in our board packet, so I'm sure you can just review those. And then that takes us to adjourning the meeting. We adjourn. I'll take the motion in a second.
Second.
All those in favor, adjourning today? That was everybody. So, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
For the remote flexibility on this one, I'm literally at a renewable energy siting and permitting conference right now in Seattle. So thank you.
Well, I guess that's a good enough excuse.
Cool. Thank you all.